Vice President Vance criticizes the weak European leaders for claiming that they could fight Russia on their own despite lack of experience. The mainstream media have a full-on meltdown over these comments, and the British political party leaders become divided on this issue. Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 2CTV, your global news channel. It's been a dramatic last few hours yet again over the issue of the Ukraine crisis and conflict. Vice President Vance made some comments during an interview on Fox News. The mainstream media took it out of context. They didn't show the full context and the version, which we're going to show you obviously. And he was talking about this new coalition of the willing by the European leaders, and they've all agreed to it anyway, and saying that well, the Europeans, they didn't actually name the actual countries anyway, but it was about the stereotype of the European continent, the EU mentality, saying these guys think that they can actually go to war with Russia directly on their own without despite lack of experience. The context is the fact that it's absolutely correct. Not one single Western European country has been at war in their own territories, has been under attack over the last 20-30 years. The last time was the Falklands Island, which was a British territory in 1982. Not one single Western European country has been attacked. And obviously, in terms of European countries right now, ask the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians can tell you how it feels to be at war. They are at war in their territory. That was the whole point, but the context is important. We're going to show you the actual interview, the longer version of his response, and then the actual reaction from the legacy media. The British political party leaders are divided on this. Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch, and Nigel Farage, all three have responded completely differently, and we're going to explain each one of them. First, let's go to Vance and see how he got to the end of the statement, and obviously criticize the weak European leaders. Let's go to
And here's the thing, when you would talk to the Biden administration officials in private, this is another example of a terrible situation the Biden admin left the Trump administration. When you ask them what's the plan, okay, we're going to spend tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in Ukraine. What is your plan? And they would honestly tell you, well, we're just going to send them weapons for as long as we can and hope eventually they can turn the tide. Hope is not a strategy. Throwing money and ammunition at a terrible conflict, that is not a strategy. The only guy in town with a strategy is the President of the United States, and everybody needs to follow his lead.
What scares me is Zelensky, when he says it's going to go on for years. How many more lives are going to be lost? He's not going to have a country to save at the end of that. The minerals deal would have provided the monies to rebuild their country and a strong U.S. presence and maybe European troops as well.
And this is an important part of it. The president knows that, look, if you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The security guarantee and also the economic guarantee for Ukraine is to rebuild the country and ensure that America has a long-term interest. You're not going to do that if you come to the Oval Office, insult the president, and refuse to follow his plan for peace.
So this is absolutely spot on. So a lot of people didn't actually realize the context, and the mainstream media say, "Oh, he's saying the UK sending troops. He's insulting the UK, saying the UK has not been at war." Oh. Okay, so number one, the American language for European countries, they just see the European continent as one, essentially. So, and each European country is just a province. He's absolutely right. Not one single Western European country has been at war in their own territory, not been under attack for decades and decades. The last time was the Falklands Islands, as I said, in 1982, British territory. It doesn't really count when you have, for example, the French or the British troops going to another country, another continent, to send support for the Americans when the American globalists were going around causing trouble in Afghanistan or Iraq. That's not the same as when your country is at war. For example, as I said, ask the Ukrainians, and they can tell you how war actually feels. That's one thing. He's absolutely correct about the statement regarding the European leaders with this coalition of the willing, because the coalition is not really just about the UK. Saying, well, the UK, he's talking about the UK, he didn't mention the UK. It's all the countries right now. And by the way, Italians are fighting back. Meloni is not going ahead with this coalition. JD Vance obviously hit back saying this is absurdly dishonest. I don't even mention the UK or France in this clip, both of whom have fought bravely alongside the US over the last 20 years and beyond. Exactly, he's right. But let's be direct. There are many countries who are volunteering, privately or publicly, support who have neither the battlefield experience nor the military equipment to do anything meaningful. This is the debate, the clash is basically between the new counterculture and political correctness. Political correctness, which is old school politics, tiptoeing, make sure every word is picked correctly, and you have to make sure that you don't really give any opportunity to others. The issue with this is that when he's slamming the European countries, and the European continent basically, random European countries, he's basically saying you guys have no experience or the equipment because you have not been under attack for decades and decades. What are you talking about? Without the American support, they have nothing. This is where the British politicians came in, and political leaders from the three main parties are all divided on this. Starmer, Badenoch and Farage. First, let's go to the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, who responded by slamming him, criticising JD Vance, saying, JD Vance is wrong. Wrong. For 20 years in Afghanistan, pro rata, our size against the Americas, we spent the same amount of money. We put the same number of men and women in. We suffered the same losses. So clearly, Nigel Farage didn't really get the context of what JD Vance was talking about. But it's not really a surprise because the official position of Reform UK, because Reform UK are now extremely popular in Britain. And whether you like it or not, a huge chunk of British society are not necessarily obviously pro-Ukraine. Obviously, the Ukrainians are under invasion, but pro-Zelensky. And this is the consistent messaging with Reform UK's messaging. Obviously, Richard Tice, deputy leader, also went to Ukraine, supported Zelensky's government and everything else like this. So this isn't really new when it comes to position from Reform UK. Having said that, Kemi Badenoch came to defend JD Vance because obviously they're friends and she knows him, and obviously she saw the clip in the right context. So the leader of the Tory party, Kemi Badenoch, came to say, I know JD Vance quite well. I've looked at the comments. I don't think he actually said that. A lot of people are getting carried away. They are saying loads of things and getting quite animated. Let's keep cool heads. She also said, America is our closest ally. I believe President Trump and JD Vance want peace. They are looking after their national interests. We need to do so as well. And again, this is how you actually understand the context. For once, I'm going to praise Kemi Badenoch. She got it. She understood. For once, Kemi was the one who didn't go with political correctness and the cancel culture by just basically saying, I'm just going to get emotional. Anything I hear that's out of context, I'm just going to get completely emotional about it. It's basically the clash of egos and personalities. Meanwhile, the third party leader, the main party leader, in this case, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has taken a third approach, which is kind of interesting. Actually, I kind of respect it. No comment. He's not commenting. Fair enough. I cannot believe I'm praising the Prime Minister. I mean, everything he's doing is completely incorrect, including creating this coalition with the European leaders with no plan whatsoever on how they can actually send their troops to Ukraine. But he's smart enough. He's been told, don't respond. Just don't say anything. It's none of your business. You're just going to make it worse when you open your mouth, Keir. Just shut up. He's right. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things to mention on this issue. A lot of people came out and say, as I mentioned as well, our last recent British war was probably the Falklands. It was actually, yeah, which was in 1982, 43 years ago. So JD Vance is pretty close to the mark. He did say 30 to 40, yeah. Yes, we have been involved in other wars, but that was us helping other countries. But it's true, as I said, none of the Western European countries have been at war in their territory for decades and decades. The last one, the Falklands Islands, as a British territory, is not even in Europe. So, but that's again, going back to the main issue, Darren Grimes also said, how do we know JD Vance was actually talking about Britain when he referenced nations that haven't fought for decades? He served in Iraq. He would have known British squaddies out there. Well, obviously, He knows, everybody knows, even our pet cat knows that the British troops were in Afghanistan and Iraq. That doesn't count. It's not the same as your country being under attack. You're going around the world invading other countries to liberate them. It's not the same as having the experience to defend your country. Again, the Ukrainians have that experience right now. Not doing too well. I mean, well enough to actually stop the actual full invasion in terms of full occupation by the Russians. But that's one example. Yugoslavia had an issue a few decades ago when it comes to the European continent, but not in Western Europe. So all that's going on. Meanwhile, the reaction from the Trump presidency continues to be robust on the international stage. They're not messing about. They don't really care about the consequences from the mainstream media narrative. They're hitting out at all the globalist countries, Western and Eastern globalist countries, who are causing trouble against the American interests. So President Trump announced the targeting Canada, Mexico, and China for causing mayhem. They fired the first obviously attacks in terms of the tariffs, 25% tariffs on both Canada and Mexico, 10% on Canadian energy, and another 10% on China. The Canadians decided to hit back with 25% tariffs on US goods, but again, it's phased over 21 days. China have also decided to hit back with 10 to 15% tariffs. And Mexico have also announced their, roughly between 20 to 20% duties on US pork and steel. The Mexicans are too scared to actually do proper war on the trade war. So they're like, yeah, we're something between 5% and 20%, something on American pork. We might do that. It's because every single one of these countries are problematic for different reasons against the American interests. And especially when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, they are the leaders of the Eastern globalist bloc, and they have their own agenda, just like how the Western side have their own agenda. Now, the problem with China is that they tend to be seen at this point as less warmongery, more diplomatic. But it's a lie, because we know if they could, they would take Taiwan. That's just one example. If they could, they would take the rest of Central Africa and other places as well. Their expansion in the Middle East and Central Africa has been insane. Marco Rubio, as a Secretary of State, is absolutely correct. He came out to actually explain the problem with China as the real threat going forward, instead of all this nonsense about Europe.
China is going to be a rich and powerful country. No matter what we do, that's what we're going to have to deal with that. But we have to deal with the reality. What we cannot have is a world where China is so powerful we depend on them. And that's right now where we're headed, unfortunately. We have to be present. In the Indo-Pacific, they're trying to drive us out. We have a strong relationship. We are a Pacific nation. We are. And so we have relationships in the Pacific, and we're not going to abandon those. Japan, South Korea. You mentioned Taiwan. We have a long-standing position on Taiwan that we're not going to abandon. And that is, we are against any forced, compelled, coercive change in the status of Taiwan. That's been our position since the late 1970s, and that continues to be our position, and that's not going to change. We have to have military capabilities that allow us to respond to the threat that China is posing, and we need to be concerned. We have our aircraft manufacturing, our ship manufacturers. They are not keeping pace. China can build 10 ships before we can build one. That's a very serious vulnerability that cannot continue.
He's right. Focus on the priorities right now when it comes to the global stability of the so-called world order, but also your own country's interest. If you're in America, America's interest. If you're in Britain, Britain's interest. And the European leaders, especially in the name of the European Union, they're going around creating their own interests in the name of their people without actually getting the consent of the people. That's not how democracy should work. And this is where the complications come in, because the Zelensky's government, following last night's announcement that President Trump said, well, we're going to suspend the support for Ukraine, military support, the Ukrainians have obviously now changed their tune. Zelensky's come out to basically show regret in terms of what happened in the Oval Office, and he's ready. We just got this statement again, just got the breaking news. Zelensky calls that White House row regrettable and says he's actually now ready to negotiate for peace, despite the fact that yesterday he was not optimistic. He said, I don't think peace is going to happen anytime soon. We're far, far away from it. But now that the support has been suspended, again, carrots and sticks, it works. Same thing, same tactics that Trump uses when it comes to trade. on using tariffs as a tactic. It's fascinating. Every time he uses that, people say, oh, President Trump hates global trade. President Trump has also announced that there's going to be a free trade agreement with Argentina and the United Kingdom. He's not an isolationist. He's pragmatic. He's a business person. He uses tariffs as punishment to bring you back to the negotiating table. That's the only thing that's always worked in his presidency. Let's get some reaction from you guys. First on Super Chats, Clipper, thank you very much, saying, why do people with massive egos think everything is about them? It was clear that Vance was generalizing with his comment. Exactly. That's, as I said, the Americans see Europe as just one entity. It's just when European leaders, and there's a point, because when European leaders say one thing, EU leaders and non-EU European leaders, they all basically say the same thing. I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, in this case, Giorgia Meloni has gone against the European Union again, and she's choosing the American side, basically saying, well, we're not going to send the troops with this coalition, European coalition that they want to create. And Meloni is calling for peace between US and Europe. But mostly the European countries, they just go with the same script. And none of them have any experience when it comes to being at war in their own territories. They don't have the equipment to be able to fight against large nations on their own with US support. They don't have that experience, and this is completely embarrassing. And the Americans make a good point. Ivan says, how many years did Farage spend in Afghanistan? Don't think he did. Daniel says, great job always. Maya, as an American, I feel like J.D. Vance referenced the EU troops. The coalition of the willing, that's what he meant. In general, who haven't seen much conflict in a long time. As I said, no conflict since 1982. And that wasn't technically in the continent of Europe. It was a European territory, British territory, the Falklands Island, but it wasn't actually in the continent. Cynthia says, do we have to be politically correct now when we're trying to warn you that you're going to get your asses handed to you? Reality check. Trump is the only one who can handle crazy Putin to end the war. Yeah. Listen to Cynthia. Phil says that the World Economic Forum have got a vendetta against Trump. They say all the vested interests have that problem. Let's get to some non-super chats as well. Independent Peach says, love that, let Europe pay for this BS and fight it. Americans are sick of this. We can't afford it. The irony is the Europeans can't afford it either. So the solution that the Europeans have, and they've been sending their people to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, to have conversations to see if there is a way to find a new mechanism to borrow more money and print more money without instant consequences. So what that means is that the European countries who don't have money, which is basically all of them, will be printing money and borrowing money from international entities using terms and conditions that won't have negative consequences for another couple of decades, which means by that time, the current political leaders and governments will not be in place. It's not going to be their problem. They're going to be seen as heroes right now. They're going to spend that money, but future generations will have to pay for that bankruptcy. That's happened before anyway, but this is again the same approach. I cannot believe they're allowed to do this and sending their idiots to the IMF, and the IMF are like, oh yeah, sure, let's have a meeting about this. And if you continue to do this, even if you ask China, they can tell you that approach doesn't work because the Chinese economy is in a mess, mostly because of the national debt in China. It's ironic because the West owes China a lot of money, but also China owes money to the international banks as well. It doesn't work. Even if you postpone it for another 10 years, 20 years, it's going to come back and bite you in the ass. Italy's leader, Giorgia Meloni, said she will not send Italy's sons and daughters to die in Ukraine. Yeah, and by the way, Meloni is still pro-Ukrainian, as in like normal people are saying, well, normal, ordinary Ukrainians are suffering. Criticizing Zelensky's approach and government and the European leaders doesn't mean you hate Ukrainians and you want them to die. But she's still robust. Both Meloni and also in terms of the Western allies in general, Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, who's also been quite robust in terms of his support for any nation that's under attack, whether it's Israel or Ukraine, he's also now realized that Zelensky and Team Zelensky are difficult to deal with, so he's not showing any support now. So, and he's also deleted his photo with Zelensky that they had. He's gone further than what he's doing right now. Romy says, as I said, Nigel Farage is just another politician who has his own agenda that is a backup to the establishment in case things go off course. Farage is not a real leader. He's a double-faced. The thing is, I mean, you can criticize Nigel Farage's approach, and obviously I don't agree with him what he said about JD Vance, but he's still a leader. As in, like, you can be a good leader or bad leader. You can be a popular leader but not effective leader, or you can be an effective leader but not popular, like the early days of Margaret Thatcher in the 80s. He's still a leader, and he's popular, whether you like it or not. And the big chunk of British society, because of the narrative from the mainstream media, are massively pro-Zelensky. But they think if they support Zelensky, that means they're supporting Ukrainian people. They think it's the same thing. So when you ask in the opinion polls, whether like, yes, we agree with Nigel Farage, and they would actually attack Kemi Badenoch, because Kemi is the only leader who's actually defending JD Vance. But the British public are going to attack Kemi Badenoch, which is funny. But it is the problem with Western Europeans. And especially if you guys are watching from the United States, you might know or think that, yes, we know us Americans are different to you Europeans and Brits. But you'll be surprised to hear there's a much more difference, a huge difference in terms of psychologically, mentality, the way Europeans, overall, by the way, not the people right now, most people watching this, because there's a lot of good people who understand logic and reason watching 2CTV from Britain, from Denmark, from Germany, France. But there's still a big chunk of societies in Europe who, again, are always dependent on what the establishment tells them to do. So if the European media report something, they just say, yes, we agree. It's that problem with the authority that everybody just has to have. They are completely reliant on the authorities to actually have and be credible. And it's a big issue. They don't tend to question things as much as an average American. But again, we do have a lot of people in Britain, a lot of people in Europe who do think differently. But they're told to shut up. They're told that you're far right. They're told that you're an idiot. Let's go to another non-super chat. Jim says, I don't trust Farage. I used to like him a lot, but ever since he mocks people supporting Tommy and also changes his views on the influx of immigrants and now agreeing to boots on the ground. Yeah, and the thing about this, even the Tory party were quite cautious not to support Keir Starmer's announcement when he meant, obviously, the UK led the coalition of the willing, which is basically get the European countries to send troops to Ukraine, right? Even the Tories were kind of good on that, but the Reform UK as a whole, as the party itself, didn't actually criticize Keir Starmer. I mean, what sort of messaging does it send? It helps them in the opinion polls because of the reasons I said. So people will see Reform UK as more centrist and more grown up and more, I don't know, sensible, I guess, because they're going with the same narrative. So it will help them in the opinion polls. Absolutely. They could get a lot of more support from slightly more liberal-minded, centre-right, Tory-ish voters. They could get that. Absolutely. But is it the right thing to do? Nigel showing the WEF pull his strings. No, in this case, it doesn't have to be WEF. It's just, the same European narrative that they all believe in. And yes, the last war we fought was the Falklands. Yeah, and this is the last time we had to defend ourselves was the Falklands. Yeah, the coalition of the greedy and corrupt. No, it's the coalition of idiots with no experience and no equipment and no money. What are you going to do? Oh. And it's interesting because, again, just like how a lot of us have been criticizing Zelensky's approach, President Zelensky's approach, not Ukrainian people, and now we're also criticizing this coalition of the willing, whatever it's called, then people would say, well, does that mean that you agree with the Kremlin that Ukrainians should be wiped out? I'm like, no, it's just the approach is stupid. It doesn't work. You have to change your tack. when you know it's not workable. Without the Americans, you can't do anything. James says Farage was cheering and applauding Starmer's Ukraine speech in UK Parliament. Well, almost all political parties did that, apart from the independents, essentially. But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to foreign policies, you don't see much divide when it comes to the House of Commons. The major mainstream political parties always tend to agree with each other. Same thing happened with the Iraq War. With the vote in Parliament with Tony Blair, the Tories were as supportive as the Labour Party. So this tends to happen because when it comes to the United Kingdom, British politics, it's not really like the American politics where it's from the ground up. The power is done by the people for the people. It's actually from the state itself. Some would call it the Foreign Office. Some would call it the palace. Not necessarily the actual king, but the palace itself as the entity, the crown. That doesn't really change. The foreign policy is not decided by the MPs we elect as politicians. The foreign policy is decided by the state, by the unelected side, the people who are always there, the faceless bureaucrats who are behind the scenes. Doesn't matter what MP is in power, doesn't matter what party is in power. Foreign policy doesn't change unless they decide that it has to be different. It's always the same. Whereas in the United States, a country like the US, you can actually vote for a new person and they bring in their own people and the whole foreign policy could change. But they don't like that here in Europe, generally speaking, because it creates instability. They don't like that sort of change. They're like it's radical. They're always terrified that Europe could turn into what happened in 1914 all over again. Everything is to prevent 1914. That's the paranoia. Even if that comes with more control, more measures to actually restrict democracy and freedom. But there are a lot of European people who say, yeah, fine, we're happy. As Europeans, we're happy because we like to be content. Again, with all the respect to some of the European cultures, including the Nordic countries, the Scandinavian side, that it's a very, very common thing. People would choose to be content. Nothing wrong with it, by the way. It works for the culture, fine. People in Norway would like to be content. People in Sweden like to be content. I'm just saying it's very different to the mentality from different countries like the United States of America. Content is not enough. Anyway, Clipper says Farage jumps on any chance he can to insert himself into any political drama he can in an attempt to try and stay relevant. I bet he knew full well what Vance meant. Benefit of the doubt, part of me thinks, because obviously the interview, when it was asked, it was late morning, early afternoon. Benefit of the doubt, maybe Nigel didn't actually see the full footage. Although, that's not a good excuse because in the same moment when he was asked, Kemi Badenoch, in the same place, she was also asked the same question and she said she saw the clip. Benefit of the doubt, maybe Nigel didn't see the full context, but the criticism still is, as a political leader, you have to be on top of everything. If you guys, just watching this, and managed to actually find time to see a 1 minute longer version of the statement made by J.D. Vance, I think a party political leader in Europe could find time. Kemi did it, so maybe he didn't have a chance to actually see the full context. If he did and still said that, then that just makes it a little bit worse. Farage was foolish in his criticism of Vance. It was simply a general observation and one of fact. Exactly, spot on. The US spent $71 billion on Ukraine because the rest of it got missing, by the way. The rest of the $100 billion got missing. I don't know where it's gone. Nobody knows. And yet Ukraine is losing the war. Israel defeated their enemies within a year and Israel got only $26 billion. And also Israel spent more money on the US. So as in Israel bought a lot from the US in terms of weapons. It wasn't just handouts. And Zelensky doesn't want a peace deal. But the other thing about the European mentality and the European leaders, by the way, every time I talk about the European side, I'm simply talking about the elitist mentality, the people at the top, the establishment in Europe. That's the main issue that we have psychologically. Europe goes to Zelensky and says, in terms of people who say winning, you have to define what winning is. I mean, if winning is removing all Russian troops from all parts of Ukraine, well, it's going to be very hard, right? But they say, keep fighting, we'll give you everything, right? And you can do anything, we're not going to criticize you. Europe says that to Zelensky. But Europe is the same continent that goes to Netanyahu as Prime Minister of Israel, who can actually win his war against the bunch of barbaric minions, Islamists in the Middle East. Europe says, nope, ceasefire now. Ceasefire now, ceasefire now. Don't fight. Don't defend yourself. You're evil. There's a double standards in terms of messaging. And it's quite clear what's going on in Europe. Anyway, so this is the latest update on this matter. We're going to take a quick break because there's more issues coming in from the Middle East, both in Iran and also in Gaza. Just realized there's one final super chat from Cynthia. Thank you again, saying, well, for the Europeans who are having difficulty with free critical thinking, they need to join 2CTV Plus and hear the full truth. That is absolutely spot on. Doing my advertising. Yes, join 2CTV Plus by going on 2c.tv. Find the link in the description. You get access to all our documentaries and premium shows and the chat forum. I'm Maya 2C, and we are the media.